When we think about the biggest question of all, where did life even come from? Our minds usually jump to cells, maybe a warm little pond and a bolt of lightning. But what if one of the main characters in that story is something we don't even really consider to be alive? Today, let's dive into the strange, ancient, and maybe essential role that viruses played in the origin of everything.
To even begin to understand their role at the very start, we first have to get our heads around a huge riddle, the puzzle of what viruses actually are, right now sitting at the absolute heart of biology.
So, here's the big one. Are viruses alive? I mean, they evolve, they make copies of themselves, and they have an impact on every single living thing on this planet. And yet, if you ask a scientist, the official answer is, well, no. And the reason why the answer is no gets us a whole lot closer to their mysterious beginnings. This is where you see the fundamental split. Cells are like these little self-sufficient factories, right? They have their own metabolism to create energy, and they have ribosomes, which are the protein-building machines, to make everything they need. They're totally autonomous. Viruses, though, they're basically just blueprints in a box. Outside of a host cell, they're completely inert, just a bit of complex chemistry waiting for something to happen. They have no ribosomes, no way to build anything. They literally have to hijack a cell's factory just to reproduce. And yet, even though they aren't technically alive, just look at this number. That's a 10 with 31 zeros after it. That's the estimated number of individual viruses on Earth. It's a number so ridiculously vast it's hard to even comprehend, way more than all the stars in the observable universe. So how on Earth can the most successful thing on the planet not even be alive? Well, to solve that riddle, we've got to rewind the clock. Way, way back, before the first cells ever existed. Back to a time when we can just make out the echoes of a primordial world, where the rules of life were still being figured out. A lot of scientists think that before our familiar world of DNA and proteins, there was an RNA world. In this ancient environment, RNA was the star of the show. It did everything. It wasn't just a messenger like it is in our cells today. It actually stored the genetic information and it did the chemical work of building things. And this isn't some fringe idea, It was seriously considered by none other than Sir Francis Crick, the guy who co-discovered the DNA double helix. He saw that RNA had this incredible potential to be a kind of one-molecule life form all on its own. So how could that possibly work? Well, these early RNA molecules, which we now call ribozymes, basically RNA that acts like an enzyme, had this one key ability. They could make copies of themselves. And that, right there, is the absolute bedrock of life, the ability to reproduce. But that's not all they could do. They could also catalyze reactions, building other molecules up, breaking them down. So they weren't just passive bits of information. They were active workers, there in the primordial soup. And this is the crucial part. When they replicated, they sometimes made mistakes, little typos. These mutations meant they could change over time, adapt, and go through natural selection. So they could replicate, catalyze, and evolve. I mean, doesn't that sound an awful lot like life? This whole idea leads to a fascinating possibility. Maybe viruses aren't just broken pieces of cells that showed up later. This is what's called the virus-first hypothesis, the idea that they are the direct descendants of these first pre-cellular life forms, relics of that RNA world that figured out how to survive by becoming parasites of the new cellular life that evolved around them. Okay, but just as that idea starts to feel kind of neat and tidy, the story takes another huge twist. Discoveries in just the last couple of decades have started to completely blur the boundary we thought existed between a simple virus and a complex cell, and it makes the origin story way more complicated. So back in 2003, some researchers were looking at amoebas from a water tower and found something they were sure was a bacterium. It was massive, but it wasn't a bacterium at all. It was a virus, and they called it mimivirus because it was a mimicking microbe. It was the first of what we now call the giant viruses. And when they sequenced its genome, they were absolutely floored. These giant viruses have enormous amounts of DNA, hundreds of genes, and even, impossibly, genes for making parts of the protein synthesis machinery. The stuff that was supposed to be the exclusive property of cellular life. This chart really shows you just how blurry that line has gotten. I mean, look at a Pandora virus over on the far right. Its genome is way, way bigger than a lot of free-living bacteria. This doesn't look like some sharp divide between life and non-life anymore. It looks much more like a continuum.
So, the existence of these giant viruses totally breathed new life into two other big hypotheses that really challenge that virus first idea. The reduction hypothesis suggests that maybe viruses were actually once complex, free-living cells that just shed all the genes they didn't need anymore as they became parasites. And then there's the escape hypothesis, which says they're just runaway pieces of genetic material from a cell that evolved a protein coat. Finding giant viruses suddenly made both of those ideas seem a whole lot more plausible.
So we have these different origin stories kind of battling it out. But, maybe the most important question isn't just where viruses came from, but what they do. As it turns out, they might just be one of the primary architects of evolution, this constant creative force shaping life as we know it. And that's because viruses are basically the planet's ultimate genetic delivery service. When they're replicating, they sometimes accidentally scoop up a bit of their host's DNA. Then, when they infect a new cell, even in a totally different species, they can just drop off that genetic code. This process, called horizontal gene transfer, is a massive engine for evolution. And if you want proof, you don't have to look any further than your own DNA. This chart shows a slice of our genome, about 8%, that's made up of what we call endogenous retroviruses. They are literally the fossilized remains of ancient viral infections that stitched themselves into our ancestors' reproductive cells millions of years ago. We are, quite literally, part virus. And this viral DNA isn't just junk sitting around. Take a gene called syncytin. Originally, it was a viral gene that let a retrovirus fuse with and infect a cell. But our ancient ancestors co-opted it and gave it a new job, fusing cells together to form the mammalian placenta. Without that ancient viral infection, it's possible none of us would be here. Which brings us right back to our riddle. Are viruses ancient relics of a forgotten world? Are they just degenerate cells or escaped genes? Or are they something more, a constant creative force weaving new patterns into the tapestry of life? The truth is, it's probably a messy, complicated mix of all of those things. Viruses defy our simple categories, and they remind us that the story of life is far more interconnected and honestly, far stranger than we ever could have imagined.